Watching Bryce Harper over the last few weeks has been nothing sort of sensational, and it got me to think about an old topic. We've talked about it before, but an old topic that was talked about a lot during Bryce Harper's early part of his career, his comparison against Mike Trout. Who would you rather start your franchise with? Who is the face of the MLB? Who is the best outfielder of this generation? It used to be Mike Trout running away with it. With all the MVPs, all the personal accolades, leading the league in home runs, leading the league in steals. At this point, as Bryce Harper sits in his second straight NLCS with another chance at going to the World Series, I think it's Bryce Harper. And I don't think I have any qualms. I don't think that's hot takey anymore. I think it's truly defined that Bryce Harper has surpassed Mike Trout at the age of 31. Kyle Ledbetter, what say you?
Remember 4 years ago when the Washington Nationals won the championship in the first year after Bryce Harper left to go to Philadelphia? It is one of the most random world champions that baseball's ever had. A sport that's completely random. It's one of the most random world champions they've ever had. And that season was maybe the lowest point of Bryce Harper's reputation and career. 3 years later, which was last playoff run, he had shaken that off all the way. He won an MVP. He was the postseason hero for the Philadelphia Phillies. Just awe-inspiring performances. The game-winning home run to close out the NLCS against the Padres. So many big home runs against the Braves. Every time Bryce Harper comes to bat, you're afraid that that baseball is going to go out of the yard. Or if you're a fan of baseball, you're excited to think about that baseball going out of the yard. And he had one of the greatest postseasons of all time. Like they showed the OPS numbers through a postseason run, and Bryce Harper was like top 5 all time. And he came back and did it again this year after elbow surgery, after moving to first base to accommodate Rhys Hoskins tearing his ACL and him not being able to play in the outfield. After all of that, Bryce Harper's doing it again. And now, I mean, Bryce Harper is regarded as maybe the best player in baseball right now. And for him to go from where he was 4 years ago to now is just a remarkable improvement. And I don't know where it stands in the pantheon of Bryce Harper versus Mike Trout. Both of them are going to be Hall of Famers. Both of them are going to be regarded as the class of baseball and guys who represented the game the right way and all that sorts of yada, yada, yada stuff. But I don't know how they compare at this point. But what Bryce Harper has continued to do has just been so exciting to see, because he is him in the simplest way I can describe it. He is him, and he has these last 2 playoff runs given us postseason moments to last a lifetime. As Philly fan or not, we're going to remember these 2 postseason runs and look back on baseball history and be like, hey, the Phillies have made it to 2 straight World Series. Even if they don't win one of them, that was the Bryce Harper run. And we're going to remember that because of how he put Philadelphia on his back and took them to 2 World Series potentially.
If he doesn't win it, it will feel very Jimmy Butler-esque, but we know with baseball, it tends to be 25 individual sports happening at the same time. And we know that that has been to Mike Trout's detriment when it comes to his career legacy. We look at the Angels and the fact that the pitching has never been right, the bullpen has never been right, the manager has never been right, the front office has never been right. And those have been all knocks against him and have held him back. But when I compare the two, I think what's been this true separator is the fact that, unfortunately, Mike Trout may go his entire career, as sad as it is to say, without having a true meaningful at-bat, without having a true meaningful postseason at-bat. And Bryce Harper, what he has done in the postseason with his postseason at-bats, even when he was a National, and yes, the Nationals fell short of making a World Series by dumb luck, by happenstance, by a Brandon Belt 18th inning home run. All those things combined to keep the Nationals from making a World Series during the time Bryce Harper was there. But during that time, he was still raking. He was still putting balls in the stands. One of the all-time moments I'm going to remember, is him versus Hunter Strickland. He got the better of Hunter Strickland in that exchange. But Bryce Harper was still doing yeoman's work as a National in the postseason, and that's only been compounded by what he's done with the Philadelphia Phillies. I'm not going to knock Mike Trout entirely, but one thing that I've noticed about Bryce Harper and his time with the Phillies is the leadership intangible. I think the leadership intangible has been on full display with what he's done with the Philadelphia Phillies. And Mike, obviously, I'm sure leads by example with what he does on the field. But at a certain point, when you don't really have success with the manager, the front office, whatever it may be, you do kind of question like his ability to lead men in the same way that Bryce Harper has been. Because you're going to tell me during the course of an entire decade-long career where you're the best player in the world, you never encouraged another teammate to elevate their play beyond their means, because there are similar teammates that these two players have that I've thought about. So obviously Anthony Rendon, he spent time with the Nationals when Bryce Harper was there. He's obviously spent time with the Angels when Mike Trout was there. You look at a guy like Marsh right now, who spent time with both the Angels and Phillies with both Mike Trout and Bryce Harper. In both those instances, Rendon, you got the most out of him when he was a National alongside Bryce Harper. Marsh, you got the best out of him as a Philly alongside Bryce Harper. Both those players, when they were an Angel, when they played with Mike Trout, you didn't get the best out of them. And I'm not, again, putting all that blame on Mike Trout, but it kind of makes me wonder, is there a missing leadership intangible that none of his teammates have ever played above their heads during their time while playing alongside him?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because people regard the Angels. I mean, we've talked about baseball hell before. People have chalked that up to the Angels. And I don't think I've ever considered the possibility that Mike Trout played a role in that, because he's always been the pariah, right? He's always been the guy who the organization is wasting away because they don't know how to evaluate talent. They don't know how to develop talent. They got dumb luck in landing Mike Trout and then haven't developed a significant major league prospect since, except for maybe Cole Calhoun, which you could argue how good or bad Cole Calhoun's MLB career was. It wasn't like he was this world-beating outfielder who was paired alongside Mike Trout. It was a lot of like, we're going to try and get Justin Upton. We're going to try and get Albert Pujols. We're going to try and get Anthony Rendon, Zach Cozart. We're going to pay a premium because we don't know how to develop our own players and put them in positions to succeed. I'd never really considered the Mike Trout element of that until you had just brought it up. So I don't really have a strong thought in either direction towards it. What I think is interesting and separates these two careers also is that, Mike Trout was a first round pick, but Mike Trout was a relative unknown. Mike Trout came into the league, burst on the scene, was having these incredible web gem plays, and there was legends of him hitting 40 home runs and stealing 40 bases and robbing home runs. But most people were only watching Mike Trout's career via highlights. Call it regional baseball, call it the Angels being bad, call it being on the West Coast and people in the Central and Eastern time zones not staying up to watch Angels versus Mariners on a Friday night, be it the baseball not putting the Angels in prime time, be it Mike Trout actively shying away from the spotlight. Like Mike Trout, a lot of his career existed in the shadows, right? Like Mike Trout was doing his thing over there in Los Angeles that people heard about. People who loved baseball watched in highlights, but you never really like got the full Mike Trout experience. A lot of it was kind of legend with Mike Trout, right? A lot of it was happening over there in Los Angeles, but we're not really watching it all that. The best years of Mike Trout were being watched from the sidelines. And then obviously the injuries started and Ohtani comes over and now we're watching Ohtani instead of Trout and all that stuff. But Jeff Passan made a great point on the Harper side of things, where Bryce Harper at 16 years old was identified as the number one pick in the MLB draft. Bryce Harper had all of the expectations in the world. He left high school to end up essentially training for a season to play baseball. Bryce Harper was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Bryce Harper was the number one pick in the draft. He had every expectation in the world, number one prospect in the history of baseball. And not only did he hit the expectations, he exceeded the expectations. Like, think how different that is as of a dichotomy between Trout, whose greatness existing in the shadows, and Bryce Harper, who is the greatest prospect maybe in the history of baseball and somehow exceeded every expectation people had for him. I think that's something that will work in Harper's favor, is that the narrative had been built up there. The story had been built up, and between the Nationals and the Phillies, because the Phillies weren't a very well-run organization until Dave Dombrowski got there and until they got Rob Thompson in place instead of the rotating cast of crappy managers, Joe Girardi and others that they had in the wing. Like, despite it all, Bryce Harper exceeded every expectation, and I think that's something that in the historical arc is going to work in favor of Bryce Harper.
And Mike Trout, I should say, still has the statistical advantages over Bryce Harper in many categories. When it comes to batting average, he still has like about a 20-point career batting average lead. He's got him beat by about 70 home runs now. But I think one thing that was separating them very early on is Bryce Harper was dealing with a lot more injuries early in his career. Right now, you look at Mike Trout, he's dealing with a lot more injuries late in his career. So there's a window of opportunity if Bryce Harper can carry his end and stay healthy, that he might be able to pass Mike Trout in some of those statistical categories, which would ultimately leave no doubt on who was the better outfielder of this generation. And I look at that Jeff Passan point you mentioned of being identified from the point of being 16. And I look at that as even more in Harper's favor as well. The fact that he had the most pressure at bats, even in the regular season, because I don't think there was a lot of people that liked him early on in his career. There was a lot of people that identified him in the same way people look at LeBron James, right? And look at him as a little bit of entitlement as far as being crowned the best in the world at such a young age. The pressure in those at-bats compared to the pressure in Mike Trout's at-bats, especially when, again, Mike Trout, they're not competing for the playoffs. Year in and year out, they're not competing for the playoffs. Bryce Harper's teams, whether it was Nationals or Phillies, competing for the playoffs, those at-bats mean more, even on a game-by-game basis, even in the context of a 162-game season. Those at-bats just meant that much more on every time Harper walked up to the batter's box. And I have to give him the edge there. So it's, numbers are starting to trend in Harper's favor. The postseason, there's no even comparison. Like, I just don't see the tunnel for Mike Trout to even get any postseason success for the rest of his career. Because at this point, if Mike Trout, let's say he does end up on a team that we consider an active contender, right? Let's say the Angels clean house, he's traded to the Dodgers tomorrow, as much as I don't want to see it. He's going to be looked at as more of a side option rather than an entree, right, for the team. Like Bryce Harper, he's looked at as the driving force behind the Phillies' success. Yes, you could say Nick Castellanos is having a hell of a season. Schwarber clubbed another home run the other night. The pitching has kind of come together for the Phillies. But people look at Bryce Harper as he is the guy putting this team on his back and leading the Phillies to another World Series run. Mike Trout, if he went to a World Series contender right now, he would be looked at as the supporting cast, the role player, not the star. Again, the Dodgers, he's outshined by Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts. If he ended up on the Braves, he would be like the fourth best player on that team. There's just not like a team where Mike Trout would be the leader. And I don't, again, going back to the leadership intangible thing, again, not putting all the Angels' failures on Mike Trout. I don't know if he can be that at this point. He's never been the rah-rah guy. And as much as I've never been a rah-rah guy in my life, in my former leadership, I've always been a lead by example guy. I think in sports, the rah-rah guy is much more needed than the lead by example guy.
Mike Trout's in a no-win position at this point, I feel like, in terms of people reputationally on him. Now, unless he goes to, say, the Dodgers, and then you have a team of Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Mike Trout, Shohei Ohtani. Say that's their batting line. I know I put the Ohtani thing in there just to prick you a little bit, but say that's the four guys in the rotation there for the Dodgers batting order. Like, I don't know if Trout gets to be win-win because it's like, oh, look at all these players that they had. And unless he has this incredible postseason performance that leads to us, forgetting that Mookie Betts is like 6 for 47 since the 2021 NLCS, or Freddie Freeman not having a hit in the entire playoffs against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Like, I don't know what the win-win position is for Trout there, but I don't think he needs to chase that at this point. Like, Mike Trout wanted to stay in Anaheim. He likes the life that he has there. And the thing that he'll always have over Bryce Harper is that statistical advantage. And I know Harper might catch him at the back end of his career on some of the longevity statistics, but that 4-year run where Mike Trout was without question the best player in the history of baseball. I mean, people called it, Mickey Mantle, and a combination of Mickey Mantle and, whoever else you want to point to. Like, Trout is going to have that as an advantage for the rest of his career, because that part of the career has already been signed, sealed, and delivered. Like, for Harper's sake, for Trout's sake, maybe you could argue this right now is the prime of Bryce Harper's career, but I think that's signed, sealed, and delivered in favor of Mike Trout. And anything he does at this point, I feel like, is gravy, because we all recognize he's not the best player in baseball anymore. We all recognize that he's still very good, but often injured. We've slipped on the banana peel so many times with the Angels with two different generational superstars that we're just kind of numb to it at this point. So I think that part's already written for Trout, but he'll always have that run from 2013 to 2019, call it 5 to 6 years, where he was either 1 or 2 in the MVP every single season, 1 or 2 in WAR every single season. He'll always have that to work with. The prime of Mike Trout's career, he'll always have that as a statistical advantage.
To add to your point, it's a blowout when it comes to WAR. Mike Trout has currently 85 wins above replacement for his career versus Harper only sitting at 46. So that at least is a blowout category in Mike Trout's favor. But again, there's just the modest discounting of it, just given the pressure in Harper's at-bats versus the pressure in Mike Trout's at-bats over that time. I don't want to put all the blame on Mike Trout, but there has to be something. Over the course of a decade-long career, we've seen other players, other superstar players be able to elevate the players around them, and that just never happened. And it's crazy to think it just will never happen as long as Mike Trout's in Anaheim. Again, baseball hell. And again, going to another team where he'll be a role player, as you mentioned, this a no-win proposition. But what I would just end it on is just saying, again, what Bryce Harper is doing with the Phillies, it's just so fun to watch. It's the best example of one of the long-term contracts handed out in the MLB that we have ever seen. We haven't seen any of these long-term contracts ever work, but it turned out betting on at the time, 27, 28-year-old Bryce Harper was the best bet that the Phillies, and as you mentioned, Dombrowski could have made. We're seeing it, they built that lineup to be a star-studded lineup. Trey Turner's come on hot. I think the Phillies, as much as it pains me to say it, like as a Giants fan, are one of the most fun watches in baseball. And I am rooting for them this year. Although if they do face the Rangers, which right now, as we record this, it's looking like the Rangers have the edge. Go Bruce Bochy. But still, Bryce Harper is probably my favorite non-Giants player in the league.
The Bryce Harper part is excellent. He's having a back end of his career that is impeccable. He's won an MVP with the Phillies. He's now been NLCS MVP. He's going to maybe win another NLCS MVP and be the best player on a team going to the World Series. Like, it has been impeccable. But the thing that you said about Mike Trout, I think, is very alluding. It's like, there has to be some sort of explanation, right? It can't just be an organization was so bad, failed the greatest player baseball has seen since Alex Rodriguez, failed him at every turn for a decade straight. That can't, like, that explanation doesn't sit well with anyone. There has to be something that can explain it away, something that details why the greatest player we've seen in 20 years in probably both of our lifetimes. I know you're a big Barry Bonds guy and you got half of his career with the Giants, but the best player any of us have seen in both of our lifetimes can't just be the explanation, right? There has to be something there. There has to be some sort of flaw. And it's a super dissatisfying answer to be like, at every turn, the organization let him down. They didn't develop. They didn't draft. The free agents they tried to sign didn't work out the way they intended, because the free agents were just making up for how terrible they had been at surrounding him with talented players before. It's super dissatisfying as an answer. It leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. And yet it's the best explanation we have for why Mike Trout has been Mike Trout. And look, Bryce Harper's only made the playoff in half of the seasons he started in his MLB career. It's not like Bryce Harper is this world beater who's gone to the best of the best organizations and always been in the playoffs like Aaron Judge. It's not quite like that. But at the same time, Bryce Harper, what he's doing recently is just so much fun to watch. And even though he's clearly not the player that Mike Trout was, it doesn't make a difference in terms of the enjoyment, because right now he's the best player in baseball and it's super, super fun to watch. And I'm hoping that the Phillies go on a deep playoff run, because man, it would be awesome to see them back in the World Series. The first team to go back-to-back to the World Series since what? The Dodgers in 2018? Like, the first time in 5 years that any team has gone back-to-back in the World Series is going to be Philadelphia, led by the Bryce Harper, Nick Castellanos, JT Realmuto, Trey Turner team with 2 top-end starting pitchers and 3 great relievers. I mean, it's awesome, right? It's not the end of his career, but I'm super glad that in year 11 and year 12 of the Bryce Harper experience, we now get a run in the postseason that gives us a new appreciation of one of the greatest players baseball has ever seen.
Again, it's a common comparison. It's a well-deserved comparison. Bryce Harper, Mike Trout. Do you think Bryce has finally done enough to surpass Mike Trout in his career? Or do you think Mike Trout still has the career advantage? I'd like to hear where you're thinking between these two greatest of all time players. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on all our social medias. From Juju and Kyle, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We'll see you next time.